Hi, everybody. I'm Connor Ronan, Client Success Manager here at Astra. Joined today by my co-pilot, Chris Triplett, Sales Engineer. Today, we're going to be discussing overcoming COVID through optimization. And first things first, we're going to tell you a little bit more about who we are and kind of our paths inside of Astra. From there, we'll dive right into the content with an overview of the phased approach of how to optimize. Then Chris will take over the controls. He'll give us a quick demonstration of setting up the optimization runs. And since this will be our second term overcoming COVID, we're going to talk about some of the best practices that we've learned since March. We'll provide you with some takeaways and some action items, and then open it up for Q&A and discussion. So as I mentioned, I'm Connor Ronan. I joined Ad Astra in February 2019. I was primarily responsible for the Southeast states, and then transitioned to the West Coast at the beginning of this year. I have a lovely wife named Emily and a beautiful Dane named Rue. And if you don't find me talking in Zoom meetings, you'll probably find me on the golf course. Chris, do you want to say hi?
Hi. Yeah, absolutely. I also wrote the bullet for Connor that called him a marketing guru because that's how I feel about him in life. But I am a sales engineer. I've gone through many roles over the last 4 years with that Astra. I kind of started implementation of Astra Schedule, moved into consulting, and now working with a lot of our teams, but doing a lot of the backup and support for our sales staff. So as you can read there, I have a dog, Frosty, a lovely wife, Sarah, a daughter, Annie, who we just got done doing school. So that was super fun. And lately this summer, I've really gotten into grilling and having a lot more fun out there. But also, as you can see on that second bullet point, big Disney guy. I was telling Connor earlier, this shirt is a subtle Disney shirt that I got this past year. But excited to talk to you today and walk you guys through just some of the best practices we found. All right. So I think we're going to turn off our cameras so you don't get to see our faces as much, but that's good because you can start looking at the content. So I think really a couple of the things here that I'll walk through really quickly because I want to make sure Connor gets a chance to pepper in, especially what he's found with clients he's worked with this last 6 months or so even, and now I guess going on even 7-8 months. Really this phased approach to optimization is going to be kind of three-pronged. The first one's going to be planning. So really it's looking at building a foundation, creating a data-informed schedule, making sure that you're going back and doing what you said you were going to do. As silly as that sounds, a lot of the time folks, when they're in the midst of the grind, forget what they actually laid out and wanted to plan to do. And really, once you've done that, it's really about thinking about optimizing the space that you do have. So this little graph, we've actually got an updated one coming out over the next couple of weeks that you'll see on our website and in some of our other collateral. But this one is really looking at, okay, we're going to roll our schedule for scenario modeling purposes. We're going to have some recommendations. We're going to refine it. We're going to import it. Then we're going to optimize based off of what we need for this upcoming term, from a room capacity to enrollment capacity per view. And then we're going to actually put it out there and hope it works. And I think what we found is a lot of folks have made it work, even though it was brutal for a lot of folks and potentially will be for the spring. But Connor, I don't know if there's anything in that planning phase that maybe you wanted to pepper in, or anything that you've found to be true, or found to be kind of some pitfalls around those kind of topics.
Yeah, so I think kind of talking about process and what goes into the planning. First things first, I'd like to spin up a test site for you to provide you an environment where we can customize those different scenarios by running a script to the back end, cutting room capacities, and effectively not doing it in your production environment to build in kind of like that safety net that when we do make those room capacity cuts, we can flip the switch and go back to hopefully sooner rather than later life as we used to know it. So that would be very much the first step in the planning for me. And then once you've submitted your ticket, worked with your client success manager and firmed those specific capacities out, we'll move into phase 2.
That's perfect. I love it, Connor. I think he hit it on the head is making sure that you're in communication with your client success manager. Obviously, if you're not talking to them, they're not going to know what you need. And they're very proactive, as you all probably know already too, that are listening in. But they're very proactive about reaching out and making sure that they are at least asking for what you need for what's going on right now in your situations. But I think they would love for you to be proactive and feel free to ask them the questions that you have. Spinning up those test sites, you can have them for a couple of weeks and really knock out the bulk of what you need for an upcoming term. But I know there's also some other options when it comes to maybe some more persistent test sites and things like that they'd be able to walk through with you and get set up for you as a part of the work you'd be doing. And so there's a lot of options, but I agree, Connor, that's 100%. The test site's where you got to start. And like you said, it goes into this phase 2, which is the setup. I say this every time I've ever consulted around optimization within Astra Schedule, but it goes without saying with anything that you're doing is if you don't have good data, you're going to have a bad output. I mean, good data in and clean data in is going to be clean data out and good data out. So that's got to start with that. So whether you're refining the meeting types, modalities, meeting patterns, your breakouts for cohorts of students, depending on what strategies that you're trying to use for this upcoming term and what maybe you used for fall 20, you've got to make sure you've got that right. And it needs to be accurate inside of your student information system so that when we're pulling it over, we're pulling the right information over too. So it starts there. And then one of the things that I've found, especially as we've been doing COVID, but even before that, optimization through this time, is rewarding those that maybe are on grid. I think at this point in time, having a good meeting pattern grid and an understanding of that and an adherence to that is really crucial, especially as you're thinking about potentially having time buffers between your classes. So if you need a room to be empty for 30 minutes for cleaning procedures or protocols or an hour or whatever it might be, those are things our teams can work with you on to build into the system. But it is also something that you need to make sure that when you're scheduling these classes that you're less probably apt to let people do what they want on that side of the house. So I think, as much as you can, reward those that are on grid or have a standard start and end time. Similarly, standardize any attributes you have, room characteristics, room types, clean that data up. That's an important piece of just using the system in general. I think prioritizing the space usage is also really key when you're building out scheduling preferences. So if you have certain departments or certain classes that absolutely need a certain area of campus, certain room types, certain features inside of those rooms, make sure that you have those rules built out and that you are prioritizing, what's most important there. It could also be prioritizing your lab sections as you're optimizing before you do lectures, or maybe it's, hey, we're optimizing auditorium or large classroom spaces versus small classroom spaces. And then ultimately with this whole process, you're going to tweak it, you're going to rinse and repeat, and you're going to keep going forward. And I think the idea is that you have a cleaner setup, better data, and a good process for how you're going to be successful putting out the schedule for students when they're actually going to try and find the rooms they need to get into. So that's kind of my 2 cents around that. Connor, anything come to mind for you around just the considerations that maybe you've seen or that you want to highlight?
Well, I think I'd probably highlight the tweak, rinse, and repeat. And I think that COVID's presented us a challenge, but it's also given us an opportunity to look at space very evenly on campus. And we know that there are pedagogical reasons for why students would have to be in specific rooms, but we can kind of win back some rooms that potentially might have fallen into faculty's hands or something along those lines, because now we can pitch it to them and say, guys, we're in this situation together and we have to overcome this. And so I've seen a lot of people creating much more generic preference sets because of COVID, and space is absolutely at the premium right now. As we cut capacities, we have to put students somewhere. So we have to be optimized.
I love that. I love it, man. And I think ultimately what you're going to have is hopefully great results. And I've seen this with time and time again with schools I've worked with over the last 6 months. I know Connor has too, just around getting a bulk or a mass room scheduling process under their belts that gets them, 80% of the way there, to where they're only making a few tweaks here and there. A few things are going to have to be manually scheduled as always, but being able to feel more confident in what you're putting out there, especially as Connor just said, like you're going to have, if you're scheduling with smaller room capacities for COVID-based capacities of rooms, you're going to have a premium on rooms, right? Like Connor said, I mean, it's right on point. Is that you're going to have to really think outside the box sometimes too about where maybe traditionally classes have been held. As like Connor said, if always math 101 is taught in this one building, in this one room, because that's what the professor that teaches that class just loves to teach there, or traditionally that's where it's been, that might have to get thrown out the window. I mean, if you're really thinking about efficiencies and thinking about the space that you have, it needs to be in a much more broad sense. A roll forward, traditional roll forward, just isn't going to work anymore. That iterative process, that tweaking, is going to have to be a big piece of it. And so, goes into that strategy design for anything that might be in a bottleneck, so it's competing for the same kinds of spaces at overlapping times. I mean, it's really comes down to student course access, making sure that you're thinking about the courses students need to take along their pathways and what that might entail. So you're going to have to talk to departments and have to talk to deans. Communication, collaboration, critical. And you're going to have to think about the faculty availability too. I mean, if you're moving things around, I don't want them to feel left out, because they are an important part of this whole process. But you're going to have to take those into consideration. And then once again, just the same kind of thing. It's just tweaking, publishing, exporting it, and feeling good about what you're putting out there. I mean, ultimately, scenario modeling like this gives you the opportunity to try a lot of different things and figure out what's going to work best. There's never going to be a one-size-fits-all strategy, or and even you're not going to come out with the perfect schedule, but it's going to be so much stronger when you're using a tool like this to play out, well, what if this happened, or what if we did this, or what if we kept things the same? How bad would it really be? I'll tell you anecdotally, probably pretty bad, but it's really a matter of just making sure you're using the tool, and thinking about, who are the stakeholders that need to collaborate on what we're doing, and ultimately to get success when it comes to the schedule we roll forward. But Connor, anything else on phase 3 that you're thinking right now?
No, I think that you pretty well covered it from my perspective.
Okay, cool, man.
Ready to move on.
I think so. Yeah, I think on the demo side, I'm just gonna throw my get into Astra schedule just real quick here. Connor, I'll have you confirm that you're able to see.
Yep, life is good.
Perfect, buddy. So as we're looking here, I'm just going to show you 2 quick things in schedule. So if you are someone that is an admin and are in and have the ability to adjust these components, this is something you want to pay close attention to. You may already know it. Great. But maybe you're not someone in that role, but you can talk to someone that is, and you want these things kind of run out. That's awesome. So one of the first things I would say that I've seen be a good success is, as Connor said, we can run scripts in the background from an Ad Astra standpoint. You just have to work with our teams in order for that to happen. And by scripts, what I'm saying is we're going to go change your capacity fields in our database to be adjusted to whatever you need them to be for COVID considerations. If it's 20% reduced capacity, 50%, whatever it might be, we can do that if you ask us to. What you can do, though, and I've seen other schools do this, and it probably is dependent upon bandwidth of your staff as well as the size of your institution, but we have seen schools that have come in and created additional configurations and then are able to set which one is default. And what I will say it's cool with this, I was talking to one of my buddies at an institution down in Florida just a couple nights ago, and we were working through this exact thing. And what he asked me, and I was like, well, that's a really good question, is can we, in the midst of an optimization, I'm layering, I'm doing one run with COVID capacity, now I want to open it up and do another run with standard, but I want to keep everything else that was already scheduled. You absolutely can do that, which is cool. So if you run everything and you set, if I come in, I can set my COVID configuration here. All I have to do is go ahead and say, hey, I want this to be my default instead of standard, click OK, and you're golden. You can change those around, and our sandbox tool in the optimizer is reading off of this field constantly. So that's how it knows what capacity to actually use. So I think that's a cool tip, a cool trick. You can add as many configurations as you might want. Just one of them has to be default at every point in time. So that's a fun one that I like, that I think can be really useful, not only in this COVID planning scenario, but one that I think is just useful to have in general for different spaces. And then the next thing I'll just demo real quick is just as you're building out, if you haven't really spent a lot of time in the optimizer, then I would say you definitely need to spend time with your client success manager and talk with them about what this process could look like. And they'll be more than happy to talk to you about that. And so this is really where I think the settings can be really a huge factor. The idea of regions, Connor will laugh internally right now, maybe outwardly, but I could talk on for days. I won't. I remember Connor first started, he accompanied me out to Northern California, and we spent some good time out there. And I spent probably like a whole day talking about regions. But it's the idea of regions can be really helpful for COVID planning, and I'll say this in a couple of different ways. With the school I worked in South Carolina, we did create a couple of rooms. We created a do not optimize room region, which were rooms that they just did not want to use for COVID purposes. So they just built a region, put all those rooms in there, and then excluded it inside of their preferences. They also, for them, they wanted to have some specific rooms blocked so faculty could use them for one-on-ones with students. And so that was a scenario that they used, and then they made a region for those rooms, marked it as do not optimize once again, so that way those spaces couldn't be allocated out using this particular tool. So there's a lot of different ways you can mix and match that. But the last thing I would say on this too is that the standard meeting patterns is where we were talking about in that kind of setup piece of rewarding on grid. If you do have standard meeting patterns built out in your system, and if you're questioning what I'm talking about with that, feel free once again to reach out to your client success manager. I'm keep putting Connor on the spot, but that's why he gets paid the big bucks. But this is a great tool because on grid is something you should definitely reward. It will also mean that you're going to have less opportunities there for bottlenecks at that point in time, because most bottlenecks that I've seen occur, probably 3/4 of them that might happen, are because you have meeting patterns that overlap and our system's looking to create efficiencies. So it may say, hey, well, I can get 2 classes into this particular time period instead of 1, because 1 is 2 to 4 o'clock instead of being on grid at whatever it might be, 11:30 to 12:45, or a 1 to 2:15 kind of Tuesday Thursday scenario. But I think that standard meeting pattern piece can be super valuable. So at the very least, what I would say is if you have questions around setups, questions around what other schools are doing, let your CSMs know. We're always updating our content on the APRC, which is our resource and planning center that we have on our website. So constantly be checking that too, because we'll have some different success stories out and about. Before I leave this, go back to PowerPoint though, Connor, anything else that you popped in your head maybe around some stories you have maybe, or some things that might be useful?
No, Chris, I think that we're probably ready to head back to the PowerPoint.
Okay, sounds good, my man. All right, cool. So yeah, I mean, really, like I said, I think that Connor and I've hit on this time and time again. Best practices, it's all about space efficiency. It's all about keeping it general. As Connor said, he's seen people be able to make things a lot more generalized in their preference sets and keep it high level. That room ownership component is, I think, something that has to be faced head on. If you're having issues with that on your campus, you're gonna have discussions there. Run multiple scenario models, once again, like we talked about, and just play in advance. I know the smiley face is more for Connor's sake, because he's the one who needs you to plan in advance. So, and Connor, maybe talk about, how far in advance you'd suggest, and maybe some things, especially when you talk about the test site earlier, best practices around that, and how people can set themselves better up for success for spring 21.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we have a long-ish runway till spring 2021, but what that can set us up for is running the optimizer today, and we can come up with a good, better, best type scenario where we run the optimizer for 25% capacity, and that's where we think life could be. And then if things do improve, we can now run our optimization run at 50% and then at 75%. And we can prepare all of this data, and we can prepare that to leadership or present that to leadership. We can have all of these conversations about the different scenarios, because I feel like COVID's always changing. There's good weeks, there's bad weeks, and there's such a flux that I think if we just kind of generalize it, let's start with 25, 50, and 75, and then fingers crossed we get to our 100%, we can run the optimizer in our standard, our production environment. I think if we do that today, it sets us up for success, because then we're not, in the 11th hour scrambling trying to make our room assignments before publishing back to our student information system. So I think the more time you can give yourself in advance, the better off we're going to be.
Mm-hmm. I love that, man. And I think just it's going to give you them, so anyone that's listening to this, it's going to give you more time to make the tweaks you need to when it's closer to the term start, whenever you feel more confident in what you've put out, from the get-go. I mean, I anecdotally, as we go to the next screen and kind of talk about the takeaways and action items, I've worked with the school in South Florida for the last 3 months, and with the school, it was the first couple of months. It's just, let's make sure we have the right data. Let's make sure it's clean. Let's make sure we have the right capacity numbers we're looking for. Let's make sure that the outputs that we're giving to the departments and to the chairs are something they understand and something that they feel comfortable with. That's really one of the biggest pieces that we started with. And then once we were confident there, running through the rest of the process was pretty much a breeze. I mean, it really was just, we've got this set up, we feel good about it. Now let's go have fun. Let's go scenario model. And so I think that's really with takeaway action item number 1 here. And frankly, number 2 is, have you inventoried the rooms? Do you feel comfortable with what those look like? Are they set up to help you run multiple scenario models like COVID room capacities, decreased enrollment values? I think those are probably 2 of the bigger things. And then just kind of breeze through it again. Make sure you engage people and collaborate. This is an opportunity to have more increased collaborative communication across your campuses. I'll plug, there's a podcast we did on that Academic Planning Resource Center with Ricky Tompkins, who's the Chief Academic Officer at Northwest Arkansas Community College. Awesome guy, big Disney lover as well. But he is just a great leader, and we have a great conversation about leadership and communication and what that really means. So there's some really good strategies on that. But I think just understanding, engaging those stakeholders is really important, and figuring out who those key people are. And then Connor said it 12 times now, I feel like, you want to model, request the test site. It's just going to make your life easier when you're doing this in test and not production, as he has said. And now I've added the 13th time for that.
I love it, Chris. Thank you
buddy.
for
Oh, of course. I'll keep plugging it away. Connor, you want to tell them where they can go? So Q&A is going to be somewhere else. And so, Connor, where do they need to go to engage us in Q&A?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go to the community topic, and there's Aspire 2020 sessions, it will be located, locate this post, and you can add your thoughts to the comment sections there. So even after the Q&A is over today, we would encourage you to continue to use the community. I think that this is a great place to share best practices, connect with our peers, and talk about all our successes that we're sharing together. So
I love it. I love it. So go talk to us. We are going to be there virtually. When you start adding comments, we'll start replying back to your comments. So it should be a fun time. And there's our contact info. And so if you want to get a hold of us to talk about at Astra, to have Connor submit a ticket for a test site for you, those kinds of things, or better yet, you should probably reach out to your client success manager. But if you don't know who that is, then Connor can direct you to the right person, and so can I. But really just reach out with any questions you have. We'll see you in the community, and looking forward to helping set you guys up for even better success for spring 21. Cool. Thanks.
Thank you.